the question that is before us, this is a complicated text and a complicated parable, and we're going to break it down, and I think you'll be able to see what it is that Jesus is wanting you to see. Jesus is not teaching us how to get into heaven. When he talks about making friends with money that are eternal friends, he's not saying there's a way to buy yourself into heaven. The whole counsel of Scripture makes very clear that the only way that we get into heaven is by grace, which is a gift, which is received by faith, that we have to have a new life, and we can get that from Jesus. But Jesus here is talking to us about how a Christian lives in this world. If we belong to Jesus, how are we going to conduct ourselves, especially when it comes to so much of the material things in this world, which we understand are necessary? We have to have food. Our bodies run on food and water. We have to have food and drink. We live in Canada. We have to have a vehicle or some access to a vehicle in this country. Even if it's a bicycle, you've got to get around. So you cannot live without material things. Money is a necessity, and Jesus knows that. But how do I deal with money as a Christian? That's what Jesus is getting at here. He tells this parable to his disciples. He has just finished talking to the Pharisees about his mission of how he has come to seek and to save the lost. And now he turns, I think that you'll see a little later in this chapter, I believe that the Pharisees are still present to hear these things, but he's speaking particularly to his disciples about how we use temporary treasures. In fact, that maybe is a good little thing to jot down. How do I use temporary treasure in this world? Here's the story that he tells, and he tells a parable, and it's got two main characters. One is a very, very, very rich man, and the other is his steward. In today's day and age, if Jesus told this parable, he might tell the parable of a very wealthy owner of a farming conglomerate, maybe something like Scotland Farms just down the road in Victoria. These are the kind of scales that this parable is told on. And his manager or his steward would be the CEO. He's the chief executive officer. He's the guy that's in charge of everything that is happening. And as Jesus tells the story, it would seem that report has reached the ears of the owner that his manager is squandering the property. The same word exactly is the word that was used of the prodigal son who squandered his own property. Here we have a CEO squandering the property of the owner, of his boss. He's using the property in inappropriate ways. So the boss calls him up and says, "What's this I hear about you? Turn over your accounts of management, for you can no longer be my manager." Basically, the word is coming that you're getting fired. Now, he's not fired immediately. Why is he not fired immediately? I don't know. Maybe the message came from a distance and the master had to get back. Maybe it's a situation where the master needs to find somebody else who can do the job, and better to have somebody doing it poorly than nobody to do it at all. But for whatever reason, the man has a little tiny bit of time. Enough time for him to think, I've been the CEO of a major company. I can't go drive truck for Scott Lynn. I was their CEO. I'm not going to go down there and slug watermelon bins into the back of a truck. And I'm ashamed to beg. That's too far of a fall for me. And then it comes to him, he says, I know what I'll do. I'm going to create a golden parachute for myself. And so he begins to call people in. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because different commentators, different scholars, different teachers of the church through the years have come up with different explanations for what he does. So there's three major theories. One is the theory of hidden interest. It was illegal for Jews to charge other Jews interest. That's part of God's law. They could charge them, they could rent to them or receive from them, but they weren't allowed to charge interest. But if you know anything about Judaism, right to this current day, and certainly in the ancient days, the Jews were pretty good at figuring out workarounds to make it look like they were keeping the law, while in fact they weren't. And one of the workarounds that was common in Jesus' day was, we can't charge interest, so we'll build it into the payment structure. We're not going to call it interest, but there's actually an extra amount added on that you know and I know is interest, but we're not calling it interest, and you need the loan and you're going to take it. And so some say that this is what had happened, that the interest was built in by the master, and that what the steward does is he strips out the interest, and that the master can't do anything about it, because in order to do something about it, he would have to basically make it public that he was doing what the law forbid. It's possible, but I don't think that that's the right answer. The second theory is it's possible that what he is doing is he's stripping out a commission or a fee. This is also a common practice. If you're the CEO, if you're the person in charge, that you have some sort of added commission or consignment on top of things, that you're making these deals. We know with the tax collectors that happened all the time. Rome said, you collect this much, and they said, that's how much I collect, and we add this little bit on top, and that's my part. And so maybe what this servant is doing is he realizes, I'm about to get fired, I'm never going to collect all that commission, so I'll sit down with these guys and I'll just strip the commission out, and that will give me favor with them. It's a theory, it's possible, but I don't think that's what's going on. I think what's going on is this guy cooks the books. I think that because Jesus actually calls him the dishonest manager, the dishonest steward. And I want you to hear that. That's Jesus' word. Jesus refers to him as a dishonest servant. And so we know that Jesus is not commending his action. He's not saying what this guy did was right, and more Christians should cook the books. Okay? The scale of these discounts are no paltry matter. This is an enormous discount. And this is just an example. This is 2 of the debtors. We presume there were many debtors. Do you want to know the scale? I did the math. I know you like this kind of stuff. The first man owed 1,000 gallons of oil. We presume it to be olive oil. That's the oil that was most common. I did the quick math. 1,000 gallons of olive oil in today's economy is worth $100,000. And so this guy says, how much do you owe? He says, I owe $100,000. He says, quickly, sit down, write $50,000. Right? There's a year's salary right there for a working man. He's looking for a way to kind of make a golden parachute, a soft landing, some way that he'll be welcomed into a home. Hey, here's a guy that just got saved $50,000. When this guy shows up knocking, he'd probably find the door swings open on nicely oiled hinges. The next one owes 100 measures of wheat? I think it is. But what that equals out to, when you break it down into bushels, is 45,000 liters of wheat. And I looked it up. The Alberta Wheat Board, I'll be riding by those wheat fields tomorrow, maybe the next day, and for a long time. A lot of prairie riding coming. The going rate of wheat right now means that this man's debt was $350,000. And so initially you said, well, listen, the first guy got half of his debt reduced. The second guy only got 1/5 reduced. But the second guy's reduction amounts to $70,000. I mean, we're talking, these are massive, massive discounts that are being given. And in this ancient time, they didn't have computers. It's hard to get a paper trail. They didn't have paper either. They wrote stuff on tablets. We presume, because Jesus calls him a dishonest manager, and because of the way that his boss speaks of him afterwards, that he managed to destroy the trail in such a way that the master realized, hey, he cooked the books, but I don't know how he cooked them. And I have no way of setting this straight. And so, as he goes out, the manager commends him, not for what he has done. He doesn't say, hey, I wish I wasn't losing this guy. He says, good riddance to that guy. But he says, well played. Well played. You are a very shrewd manager. And that's the word that sticks out, the word shrewd. Here's what Jesus says. This is where the moral lesson begins. Jesus tells the story, and then he begins the moral lesson in verse 8. In the middle of verse 8, he says this, for the sons of this world are more shrewd, there's that word again, in dealing with their own generations than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. So what's that word shrewd mean? The owner uses it, the servant, very shrewd, and Jesus says of the sons of this world that they are shrewd. That word means to be astute, or showing sharp powers of judgment in a particular area, to show sharp judgment in a particular area. So you might be a shrewd financier. You know when to buy and when to sell. You're always a little bit ahead. You've got a sharp sense of judgment. You might be a shrewd businessman, knowing what's going to be popular in the coming year and making sure that you're the one on the leading edge. This is what it means to be shrewd, to have a sharp sense of judgment. And so I've got 3 points that I want you to hear. Shrewdness, Jesus is telling us that shrewdness with money can make eternal friends. I'm going to take a minute to talk about that. Shrewdness, Jesus says, secondly, with temporal wealth. Shrewdness with temporal wealth reveals something of our character. And finally, shrewdness with money prevents enslavement. These are the 3 points I want to draw out of the teaching today. Jesus says this, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And so the first thing we see is there's a from the Christian. They're not called Christians yet, but Jesus has disciples, his own followers, and one day they will be called Christians. So there are people in the world, and these people have a generation. And presumably what Jesus is saying is that the sons of light also have a generation, but the sons of this world are more shrewd. They're more sharp, and they're quicker in judgment. They know better how to live with the world than often the sons of the kingdom, the children of light. What does that mean? For the worldling, if I'm a worldling, I don't know God, I don't accept God, I don't believe in God, I'm a practical or even a full-blown atheist, I say, listen, all morality is a social construct. It's been created by the societies we live in, and it's only real in so much as people think it's real, and therefore, if I don't really care what people think of me, then I have no reason to do moral things. And since I don't believe that there's a God or a final judgment or anything that's going to call me into question, it makes more sense for me to jettison all my morals and live to get rich. That's what this man does. He just lives as if nothing else is coming. This is, by the way, for those of you who are really highbrow, this is Nietzsche's Superman. Right? This is Rousseau's way of living that just says, listen, morals are things that the world has made up, and they don't matter. The real powerful person, the real strong person, is the person who takes those things in hand, throws them out of his way, and says, those aren't going to slow me down. And Jesus says, listen, if that was the way the world worked, then that would be wisdom. But if you're a Christian, you happen to know that that's not how the world works. That there is a God, that he is an infinite God, that he is an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God, that the very thoughts that you think are visible to God, and that you will one day be held in account for those things. And knowing that, we should conduct ourselves with shrewdness, saying, listen, everything I do matters in eternity. Jesus is not commending dishonesty. But when we consider the story, we see a man who was using something that he couldn't keep to gain something he couldn't lose. Right? He's going to lose his management. He's going to lose his income. He's going to lose all this wealth. And he says, I'm going to lose it all anyways. I'm going to do something terrible because I can't keep it anyways. And what I get for doing this terrible thing is something that I can't lose, which is the good favor of all the people who I save piles and piles of money. Now, take the principle, not the dishonesty, but the principle, and transfer it over to the Christian and say, can I use what cannot last in a way that will gain me something that I can never lose? Jesus says this when we go back and look at the actual text. Look at it for a second here, verse 9. I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, Jesus is saying this, the financial realm of this world, the gold and the silver, the stocks and the bonds, the commodities, all of the things that they trade back and forth, all these things that people pursue and that seem so solid and so real. He says, not if it fails, but when it fails, it will fail. It may fail through a stock market crash. It may fail because somebody breaks in and steals your mattress, which you'd filled full of money. I don't know where you keep your money. Mine's not in my mattress. But he says, when it fails, certainly it will fail when you die. You don't get to take it with you. Heard the story before of the man who gets to the pearly gate and he's got a bag of gold and he insists, I'm coming in, I'm taking this with me. And the angel's like, you don't need it here. I got to have it. He says, why? I earned this. And finally they let him in. And one angel looks to the other and says, why is that guy carrying around a bag of pavement? Right? Anyways. When it fails, they may receive you. Who? Well, the friends that you've made by means of unrighteous wealth. Who are these friends that we have made through unrighteous wealth? Well, when we take these resources we have, and money is one of them, but not the only one, and we use some of that resource, we take some of the surplus, we take maybe much of the surplus, and we say, how can we invest this? Can we invest this in missions somewhere? And we invest it in Round Lake Bible Camp or Camp Oneida, where children are hearing the gospel, or we send it to a mission field in India or in Afghanistan where missionaries are making the gospel known, or we help to plant a church, or you just help to cover the cost of having a pastor so that the preaching of the word goes forth with power. These are ways that we might take what cannot last and invest them in eternal ways. And who are the friends that we will meet in heaven? The friends that we will meet in heaven are the people who are often reached, not by the money, but by using our money to establish resources that are bringing people into the kingdom. Here's how Alfred Edersheim finishes the long thought. I won't read the long thought, just the end. He says, thus would each deed done for God with this mammon, this money, become a friend to greet us as we enter the eternal world. We're not buying our way into heaven, but when we arrive, we'll encounter people there. You know, the worldling says, where's my return on investment? Give me my portfolio. I want to see what the interest gained is on the investment. And he laughs at the Christian who is taking sometimes a large amount of their money and investing it in things that don't have any interest at all. He says, you're just sending that away to Bible camps and missionaries and to your church. And why is that a good investment? The thing they don't understand is that this investment is earning us friends that will greet us when we enter the eternal world. Again, we aren't buying our way into heaven, but we are discovering that we have invested in such a way that when we get to heaven, there are people who are there because of the way we used money. That's the first thing Jesus wants to teach you. The second thing is that shrewdness with temporal wealth reveals something of our character. This is what Jesus says here in verse 10. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. One who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? Now, hang on for a second. Go back there. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? I think another way of saying that is if you have not been faithful in temporal finances, the stuff that people pursue as if it's the end-all, be-all, he says that's not even true riches. Who will give you true riches? And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? There's an old Jewish story that is told of two men who were made managers by an owner over two different areas. One was made manager of his master's treasury. The other was put in charge of the barn. And the one who took care of the barn was asked to give an account for his wasteful practices. He'd been buying and using straw in ways that just were not wise. And this man complained that his role was not very important, and so he didn't put very much time into it because he wished that he'd been put in charge of something very important, like the treasury. And the master said, if you can't be trusted with straw, who's going to trust you with gold? That's a basic principle, right? If you want to know how you're going to react in the midst of great tragedy and disaster, ask yourself, how do I react in the midst of little inconveniences? Because how you react in the small thing tells you something about how you'll react in the larger thing. Remember when I was first preaching, I was 19 years old, and that summer I preached in a whole bunch of little tiny country churches. In fact, if you get the old guest book out, you'll find my name, not from that year, but from the next year. I preached in Walsh twice. I got lost on the way here. Poor Rick Cody was standing out on the back stairs, wringing his hands, wondering where the preacher was, and I rolled up on my motorcycle. I kept hitting Delhi, Simcoe, Delhi, Simcoe. I thought, where's Walsh? Somebody had said, well, you go number 3, and I think they meant the 3rd. Anyways, funny how roads have multiple names, but that's not the story I want to tell. But I went to a big church in Simcoe, probably at that time the biggest church in Simcoe, and they gave me a chance. One day the youth group took the service, and I got to preach one sermon, and I liked it because there's like hundreds of people here. And I went in to see the senior pastor, and I said to him, hey, Pastor, I think I could preach more often for the morning service. And he said, that's commendable ambition. He said, you're in charge of the grade 7-8 Bible study, yes? And I said, yeah, I'm in charge of grade 7-8 Bible study. He said, how much time do you put into preparing Bible study for grade 7s and 8s? And I gave him a number. He said, how much time do you think you would spend preparing a sermon to preach to the adult congregation? And I gave him a number, and the number I gave him was quite a bit bigger than this number. And he said, if you're going to be faithful here, he says, you have to be faithful here. He says, you can't shortcut this because you think these people are less important and give all to this. Your character is revealed. And he was wise in doing that. I didn't get to preach for the adult congregation, but I tell you, my attention and preparation for everything came up because of that teaching. If you're not faithful in unrighteous wealth, Jesus says, that's just his way of talking about money. He says it has no real righteous value. They pave the streets with it in heaven. Who will entrust you with true riches? The key to understanding the economy of the world, this is the key to understanding the economy of the world. Material wealth is contrasted to true riches. That is to say, the money of our world, the gold and the silver and the stocks and the bonds and the printed money and the cryptocurrency and all, it's all monopoly money when it's compared with eternal riches. That's true. All this thing that seems so important right now, it's monopoly money when you compare it with eternal riches, because it's all temporary and what's coming is eternal. Jesus is saying everything in this world is on loan to us. In fact, in the context of the parable he's told, we're in some ways all managers of an estate that has been entrusted to us, that everything I have, my body, my life, my intellect, my abilities, and my resources, my finances, all of these things are gifts from God that I've received, and I'm a steward. Now, here's the thing to understand, because some people come away filled up with angst from these things because they say, God wants me to go out and live like a desert father so I can give it all away. But would you consider a master to be a good master if you worked as a steward for a master and the master didn't feed you, didn't give you anything to wear, didn't give you any sort of shelter? You'd say that's a bad master. God is not a bad master. God is the greatest and kindest of masters. He will give you what you need. He will give you enough. He will even give to you abundance, right? And so the invitation is to eat out of what we have and to drink out of what we have and find shelter out of what we have and to buy a vehicle because you got to have a vehicle, maybe just a bicycle, but maybe you don't like to ride a bicycle like I do. There's nothing wrong with having a car, right? God is not saying, listen, go and become a pauper and give all, but he's saying, as you manage what you have been given, consider the fact that this is all temporary and that there are eternal wealth, riches to come. Use this well, not just your money, but also your body. I think that's probably the best argument for taking care of your body, is that we have been entrusted by God with this body. Let's use it for his glory. We've been entrusted with these abilities, with these talents, with this intellect. Let's use our abilities and our talents for God's glory. Let's be good stewards of what we have been given, because there are eternal riches to come, permanent possessions. All of this is temporary, but the eternal things are yet to come. Finally, I want to talk about the final point here, which is that shrewdness with money prevents enslavement. This is what Jesus says in verse 13. No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Jesus here is speaking about being owned or possessed, not just working as a job. You can work two different jobs. But in Jesus' day and age, most of the people that he would speak to knew what it was to belong to somebody and to have an owner. And he says, you can't have two owners. You cannot be devoted to God and devoted to money. You have to choose. You cannot love God and love money. You must choose. One of these will master you, and the outcome of that will be either glorious or disastrous. The ancient world was filled up with idols. People would have idols, and really, when you think about it, the idol was created out of superstition. The very nature of human beings is to recognize that there's something out there bigger than myself. We have not yet found in the world anywhere an atheistic culture, which tells us that even in the way that our minds and bodies are put together, that there's a shadow or a remnant or an echo of God, the Creator, that's in there, because everybody looks up and says, this came from somewhere. And so people make all these little idols. They carve them out, some out of wood, some out of stone, better ones out of gold. And the idea is that this is something that's meant to serve me. I bring and I put some berries here. I put some tobacco on there. I burn something here. I throw a couple coins in this thing, and there's a little god of crops and a little god of healthy children and a little god of safety while at sea. And these things are meant to serve me. But the reality is, any idol that we invite into our life sooner or later becomes our master. It begins to own us. And perhaps the greatest idol, and the one that's most commonly still around today, is money. We think that if I can get enough money, that money will serve me, it will obey me, it will do my bidding. But the more we focus on money, the more money becomes our master. There are some who are mastered by money, and the thing that's mastering them is money is status. And I have to keep up. I would be ashamed not to look as good as my other brothers and sisters. They all drive a certain kind of car. I have to have that good a car. Their houses are so big. I have to have a house so big. They have extra properties here and there. I have to have money as status. And we're pursuing these things, but we're not finding freedom in it. We're finding bondage in it. And then there's others who money is seen as safety or security, and that can become such a powerful thing that they're dressed in rags and driving a rusted out car, and they've got loads of money in the bank, but they just go, I can't get enough because I might need that. And money has become their god, and they're enslaved by it. You don't have to be rich to be enslaved by money. You can be very, very poor, shuffling around buying lottery tickets, and be just as much enslaved by money and the desire to have it as anybody else. But here's the thing you need to understand. Money can't make you happy, especially not as an end in itself. Right? And that's the problem. This is the way money begins to own us, is we want to have more of it. If I could have more of it, I would be happier. There is such a thing as having too little money, and and being unhappy because you just have no money. But some of the richest people in the world are still very unhappy, still very fearful that they might lose it all, fearful that they might be robbed, fearful that the people who are around them are just around them because they've got the money. Money is a terrible, terrible owner and master. And Jesus says you can't serve money and serve God. You can't love money and love God. That's not to say you can't have money or you can't use money, but we are committed to God. We belong to God. We love God. We're pursuing God. And as we do that, the power of having money and having stuff loses its grip on us. We become more able to invest in things that have eternal value. And so let me leave you in conclusion. This is one of those tricky parables and tricky teachings. I just want to recap for a moment as I close these three things. First of all, remember this and take some application here. The children of light realize that the reality of the world we inhabit is such that the money is all passing away. And so rather than using all of their money to get more money, they understand that it makes sense to use what they cannot keep to gain what they cannot lose, and they invest for eternity. Are you more? It's funny, I know when I say that, somebody goes, "Oh man, the pastor's twisting my arm." But honestly, there's nobody who will invest more in eternity, who will get to eternity and go, "That was really bad advice." So I'll leave that with you. Second, the children of light recognize that whatever they have, be it financial resources or influence in the community or talents or abilities or intellect, that all of these things have been given to us by God, not only for our use, though they are for our use. Your money is for your use. Your intellect is for your use. Your abilities are for your use. Use them well, but also that they've been given that we might benefit the church and bring honor to Christ. These temporal things are not ours to keep, but there are eternal things coming that will be ours to keep for eternity. And then finally, the children of light recognize that the power of money is to enslave those who love it, and it will destroy those who are devoted to it. So rather, love God and be devoted to Him, and have a loose grasp on these things which don't really last. Let me pray for you as we close. Father, Lord, I pray that the truth that Jesus is teaching would sink down into our hearts. Lord, I know because I feel it myself, Lord, that I am often too invested in things that don't last. Help us to think truly about these things and to see, Lord, that we are not being called really to sacrifice at all, but are being invited to invest in a guaranteed investment that is so much greater than anything we'd encounter here. Lord, help us to see the opportunities to build and establish your kingdom as opportunities to make friends for eternity and to rejoice in being able to do that. Lord, this I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.